Welcome to the Literally Dead Book Club discussion. I didn't even have the book in my hands. For Sisters of the Lost Nation by Nick Medina. Oh, we've all got it. How fun. Actually, did you guys read it audio or physically?
Both.
Physically. Oh.
Okay, I did both as well. Because I wanted to see if there was any like pronunciations that I needed to hear.
I was cramming last minute, and so I turned it up to 2 times speed and listened to it as I read it. So
stop. Is that why you're tired today? Because you were up late reading it? No. I also just finished it yesterday, right before I sent you the questions. I was like, I need to finish this so I can send everything over so everyone feels prepared. Okay, chat. If you want to put in the comments, did you read the book, or are you here just to hang out? Do you need to be convinced to read the book? Let us know. As always, I don't know anybody, especially because we all finished it within the last 48 hours. I don't know anybody's thoughts, and we'll see if everybody in the chat can kind of feel represented by somebody here. But we're going to start with introductions. I haven't had Erin or Melitta here before, so if you want to share just like, you know, a little bit about your channel, maybe like what you typically read or what you typically make content wise. And I always love to hear a recent favorite thriller or horror or a few so people can get in touch with your tastes. Erin, if you want to start.
My channel name is Erin Megan. I typically read horror, thrillers, mysteries, a little bit of romance and manga. That is typically what I focus on. Videos, I like to do reading vlogs. I like to do recommendation videos. I like to do sometimes TBRs. Even though I don't really stick to a TBR, I'm really bad at sticking to a TBR. I'm a big mood reader. And then wrap-ups. I feel like I do the typical stuff. And then for favorites, honestly, horror and me have not been getting along this year. I haven't had that many favorites. But some standouts were probably When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. I really, really, really enjoyed that book. And Out There by Kate Folk was really enjoyable.
Oh, yeah. I agree. Melitta. Go ahead.
Sorry. So I agree. Nickname Melitta. My channel name is The Midnight Librarian, and I read a little bit of everything. I'm very much a mood reader as well. I do a Pokemon cards choose my TBR every month. So I have prompts that I attach to each Pokemon type, and I open booster packs. So I just extended that to 2 months because I was not getting anything on my TBR read. So hopefully that'll give me a little more wiggle room. Otherwise, in terms of like, I kind of just read I've been really into a nonfiction right now. So I've absolutely just been like devouring nonfiction. Salmon Wars, I just finished. The dark underbelly of our salmon farming industry throughout the world. So that was
interesting.
Otherwise, in terms of thriller and horror that I've liked recently, Earth Divers, the first volume, it's a graphic novel by Stephen Graham Jones.
I didn't know he did graphic novels.
I didn't either. I saw this at my library. Actually, I'm like, I'm taking this right now, and I'm ordering it for myself.
Oh, wow.
So, and yeah, it's a dystopian horror. So that was fun. I'm starting to get into that series, and I like the Center by Aisha Menazir Siddiqui.
Oh yeah, that was a good one. Nice. Okay, so let's get into the synopsis so I can force somebody else to read it so I don't have to do it. I always make the newbie do it, and I have 2 newbies here today, but Erin has very kindly taken it on. So tell us what this book is about. Would you please?
Sure, I can do that. So in this book, we're following our main character, Anna, and she doesn't really feel like she has a place on the reservation or at school. She gets bullied, and she's kind of an outcast. She feels like a black sheep, and she starts kind of looking into some things that are happening at this casino that they have on the reservation, because there are women that are mysteriously disappearing. And her little sister ends up becoming one of the women that disappear. So she ends up diving even deeper to uncover what the mystery is and try to find her little sister.
Amazing. Oh, you thought you were going to struggle with that? Come on. Killing it. Okay. Thank you so much for that. I would love to hear everybody's rating and reasoning. Just like a one sentence. I like to just kick it off with that because there is a good amount of people in the chat who maybe are waiting for us to let them know if they should read it. So maybe our ratings will help, decide that. And everybody in the chat can also put their ratings down. So spoiler free, let me know your rating and just a brief summary of why.
I think I'm going to give it 4 stars. I feel like I actually enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to at the beginning of the book. I didn't quite know what to expect because I saw so many mixed reviews on if it was horror, if it was a thriller, if it was a mystery. So I didn't know what I was getting into. But I liked the overall plot. And I love any story that has like missing people involved. That's just one of my like buzzwords where I'm like, I will read it then. So I feel like that being the overall story made me enjoy it a lot more.
Perfect.
I gave it 4.5 stars. I think it has some really important messages. I immediately absolutely started loving it because of how much connection and things I related to with Anna being on a reservation and like having those experiences myself. And I'm just like, and I was super surprised when with certain things that ended up coming up. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that. However, I did feel like it was kind of meandering in the middle. But it invoked a lot of emotions out of me towards the end. So
amazing. Okay, so we've got a good amount of 4s and 5s here, I see. And then I think the majority seems to be 3 from what I can tell. It doesn't look like very many people gave up on it or gave it a really low. There's a couple. Interesting about the audiobook. I didn't have a single issue with like the narration or the writing or I think, okay, my one sentence, I guess, is I thought it had a good premise, good takeaways, good messages, good writing, but it failed for me as a mystery or horror. So I'm giving it a 3. I thought it was a good book. I would recommend it pretty broadly, but going into it expecting the type of mystery, thriller, or horror that I like, it didn't do many of the things that I am often looking for. So those are my thoughts. I'm glad a lot of people enjoyed it. If we want to get into spoilers, I think we should, so we can just chat about everything that happened in the book. I think I want to start with, like, did you connect to the characters? Did you have a favorite character? My question after that is also, like, are there any POVs you would have liked to see other than our main character? Because we had Anna, who, like you said, was struggling connecting to her peers with her family. And she's really the main person that we get. So did you connect to her? Did you have any other favorite characters? That's my question.
I don't know if I was connected to Anna. I was interested to see where she was going. I wanted to like see where she would end up. I wanted to see what she was going to uncover, but to connect to her was a little hard for me, but I liked her the most out of everybody else. So in a sense, I was connected to her. I feel like the only other person I think that would have been interesting would be Grace to have seen from.
Right.
I would agree. I wasn't sure if I really connected with Anna. There was a lot of things that she ended up doing that I'm like, but why? That's such a red flag. But I think everyone else was had a hard time connecting with, just because they were all just
yeah.
But I enjoyed Gran. And actually, I think my favorite character would be Miss Shelby, even though, like, technically she was never in the book.
Right.
I think getting Miss Shelby's perspective of, like, maybe even to see, like, her perspective on the stories, as well as, like, how she kind of presumed things about Anna before Anna even knew, would have been interesting.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite, just maybe not characters, but ideas of a character as Miss Shelby. And I think if there was ever, I'll talk about this more later, but like books connected to this book, I think that we could get like a whole book from her at some point, or not even just perspective on this story, like not a sequel, but just a story exploring her as a person and storytelling. I think would be really interesting. I didn't feel connected to the characters. I think the author did a good job of giving us explanations of why she was doing things. I think that was well done, but I don't feel like we got super close to her. I don't think she was a really vivid character to me. And maybe that's where a bit of my struggle was. None of the characters I felt for everyone because they're humans and I'm a human and I have empathy and I felt those things. But I don't know if I got really close to anybody. I think Grace's, if we got chapters from Grace, it would have felt more personal to her. And I think there was a reason why we didn't, because she could be anybody. And that's the whole thing, is this is a very, vulnerable group of people taken advantage of. And the whole trafficking situation in general, it could be anybody. And the book did a good job of allowing that to happen. But I think if we got like even journal entries from Grace every couple chapters or something like that, I would have enjoyed the book more.
Yeah.
Okay. As far as continuing with the writing conversations, did you like the multiple timelines? Like, did it add to your experience? Do you typically like multiple timelines? Did it like bother you? I think the number one critique that I saw in the Goodreads chat was people saying that they got confused with the multiple timelines. So I was just wondering if that's something you related to.
Yeah, that happened to me. I had to make sure I knew what day we were on, because I was like, wait, when did this happen? And then I would get confused because Grace would be there and I'm like, okay, nope, she's not missing. Right. Okay. So I did have to pay attention a little bit more, but I do notice I struggle a little bit with multiple timelines in general. Okay. So that's just, I think, a personal thing for me. It's not usually my favorite, unless it's really easy to follow. The jumping kind of makes me a little discombobulated sometimes.
Mm-hmm. I'd agree. I don't typically like multiple timelines just because I feel like I'm not smart enough for it. Like, I'm not going to keep track of it. So this was a book that I ended up like highlighting and tabbing a lot just to make sure that like I'm paying attention.
Smart. Yeah, it's when you definitely need to focus for.
But I don't necessarily like, I didn't mind it once I got the hang of it, but I don't know if it was necessarily needed.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if it improved the book, I think is my takeaway. I don't think it necessarily was needed because we could have gotten just like Anna reflecting a lot more rather than actually being in different timelines, especially because the timelines were so close together and everything is so much the same between them. Like her relationships, her job, her schooling is all the same in both timelines. The only thing that's different is Grace missing or not. So I would forget like halfway through a chapter what timeline we were in until it said Grace's name and where she was or where she wasn't for me to remember. I don't think I got confused because like it didn't super matter in the moment, but I would just forget a little bit. I think that with me, if a book has multiple timelines, I often expect it to be for the reason that it wants to confuse the reader. It wants to like reveal some secret things and be sly about certain things. And that's not what this book was doing. It was a really cut and dry story to me. And it wasn't trying to pull a bunch of things off. And I think maybe that's why my rating is where it is too, because when you introduce like the different timelines, I hope there's going to be like the rug pulled out from under me, that there's something I should have paid attention to that I didn't notice. And that's just not the type of story that it was.
Yeah.
Most people seem to say they were slightly confused. Thank you for sharing all of your perspectives. I wonder like what a book could do better to establish that. Like because some of them like don't even put dates. Some of them just drop you into craziness. And this didn't do that, but I don't know what it could improve upon. I don't know.
I think I agree, though, that, like, because of the multiple timelines, I expected something bigger to come out of it. The same with, like, the reveals, in all honesty. Like, I think I made a note at one point going, wait, it can't be that straightforward, right?
Right. Okay. Do you have any memorable scenes or quotes from the book?
So the one scene that sticks out to me, which it's not for a good reason, like I didn't like the scene, but it's the one that's ingrained in my memory, is where Grace sets up Anna at school, and yeah, that I was so upset. That really, I did not really like that at all, but I cannot get it out of my mind. Like, it's the one thing that stuck.
I agree. I was thinking about that one for a while. I kept thinking about that moment, and I was like, that's so interesting because I'm always wondering like what the author's doing, like what the purpose of things are. And I was thinking like, it's so great to show this sibling relationship and that you can like fuck things up with somebody, but because they're your blood, like you are going to stand up for them. And no matter what Grace could have done, she still deserved to be found, obviously. And I think that was I think it was intentional by the author to make this like messy relationship, but it was still so important for Anna to get her back.
Yeah.
No, it was a hard scene. Actually, what was it? It was one earlier that really stuck out to me in terms of kind of like understanding just how alone Anna was, and that was day 9 at school, where we realized that even the administration of the school didn't have her back.
Right.
And that ultimately they blamed her for all the bullying she was going through.
Yeah, I feel like that's such a...
It made my heart drop.
And it's such a common thing, like her interacting with so many different people in the book, like the police not believing her and like all these various things. Like she can't just be struggling in one aspect. It's like everything is coming down on her all at the same time. And that was really hard to read. I think for me, I wrote down 2 moments. There was one moment in the book where I teared up, and it's when her dad... There's like all this tension in the family in both timelines because, you know, they're going through a lot. And his interpretation is that maybe she left because she didn't get her cell phone that she wanted so badly. And so he buys her the cell phone and she's already missing. And he like puts it in her bed. And he's like, for when she comes back, her cell phone's here. That was so sad. I was so sad. And then the other one was, I don't have the exact quote written down, but it was like when Anna she closed the window in the bedroom, and she was saying that something along the lines of like, I left the window open to make sure she felt like she could be welcomed back. But in fact, more of her left instead, because like all of her smells and the essence of her kind of left the room, and she felt more alone than ever. And I was like, that's fucked up. So sad. I guess those moments of just like, all of us had moments of depression.
Yeah.
I guess that's like the tone of the book. It's so melancholy that those are the things that are going to stand out. I want to grab some of the comments. The epilogue. For sure.
Oh my God. So that's when I was like listening to it. And when it said epilogue, like I was still highlighting stuff that I wasn't even like, didn't know physically if we were there yet. So when it said epilogue, my heart just dropped. And I'm like, are you kidding?
Yeah.
What? And it was that realization of just like, but this happens all the time. This is the sad reality of it.
Yeah. The more we got through the epilogue and closer to the end, I was like, are they not going to find Grace? I was like, oh, this book is going to end with them not finding Grace. And like, I respected that decision. And I was like, that's reality. That makes sense. And then when they did get her back, I was like, oh my God, I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah.
Right.
The only thing I really remember is her digging the hole through the head. Yeah, that was... And the story of the head, I really think that was perfectly placed because you're waiting for a while to fully understand, like, what does this even mean? And getting that story... basically, if you haven't read the book and you're just here to whatever, Anna is seeing, I don't even know if this is fully explained. Like, is she really seeing it? Is she hallucinating? Is it like a spiritual thing? But there's this head rolling around that is terrifying her like a bowling ball. And we get the story at the end. Well, no, not the end. It was like somewhere in the maybe middle, final third, where basically there's this tale of a girl who was hurt by this boy, and she hurt her sister, and she started she was bleeding and started consuming her own blood, and then ended up consuming her entire body until she was just a head, and then started eating everything in the reservation. And it was just such an interesting tale, and getting the behind the scenes of like what that really meant was so interesting. And I think it's like a metaphor for being consumed by, I mean, it could be anything, like a relationship or something toxic in your life, or just all consumption. The frogs on the asphalt. Yeah. When she saw the streak of the first frog, I was like, oh God. Yes, I really appreciated the author's note. I'm glad that
Same.
was in there for sure.
Yeah.
Especially because for some people, like this is going to be their introduction to the epidemic that is murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls.
Yeah.
And for him to just share a little bit of the reasons behind the story, I think is important.
That and the jurisdictional issues when it comes to tribal lands as well.
Right. I didn't like, I knew a little bit about that, but her fully like explaining like him, but also her in the book explaining like how they couldn't like arrest somebody on the reservation who was not Indigenous is just so interesting and not something that I really understood. It was so interesting the head led to the bodies at the end. Like, was it real or coincidence or magic? Yeah, I think it could be anything. I guess it's up for interpretation. Okay, my next thing is what themes or messages did the book most successfully convey for you? Like, what did you pick up on?
I think that it did a really excellent job of just showing the huge issue of murdered and missing Indigenous women. That was my biggest part of the book. I think that's why I enjoyed the book so much, because I've seen so many true crime stories about it, and I felt like it was done really, really well, which is what I was hoping for. Like that's why I was excited to read it in the beginning. So that was my biggest, I think that was my biggest hope, and it was the biggest expectation for the book. And I feel like Nick Medina did it well. So that was my favorite part of the book, honestly.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I thought that was done really like to the point where like when I stopped reading the book, I like breathed for a few minutes and just started sobbing, just because of just the reality just kind of hit me of just like he did that really, really well. But also like there's the issues on the reservation in terms of like, you know, they have a casino and like everyone's now like looking at the money and just thinking about the money, and all the while Anna's looking at these frogs going, they would have been food for anybody else. They like, so I particularly really noticed and highlighted a lot of the changes that she was seeing on the reservation and how it was affecting, how she was seeing how it was affecting her fellow tribal members. And it's something that I think is seen on a lot of reservations, particularly when, you know, they have to figure out new industries in order to get that prosperity.
Right. I agree with this one. Talked about family love, but also family like pressure, family like expectation. I really liked how it didn't make Anna this like figure. It started to feel like she was going to be just like this great ambitious person as far as like what she wanted or to bring to tribal council. When we got introduced the idea that she wanted to better the community, but then that storyline got put aside because like her sister's missing and she's being bullied and there's so much else going on. But then her dad was the one who was like, no, you need to stand, like you need to do something, you need to accomplish something. And for that to come back around to being more of something that he wanted to positively reflect him and the family is so real for I think any culture and community, just wanting to appear like your children are doing something that make you look good. So I really liked how that was a part of it. A couple of people said, talked about the two-spirit thing. I, again, think that if this was your first time reading from an Indigenous author, maybe it might be your introduction to two-spirit. And I think it did it really casually, which was really an interesting take, that Anna didn't introduce a story saying, I'm two-spirit and this is me and let me introduce myself to the readers. It was more her family acknowledging like her identity. And I think if you were confused when it started, when her classmates were calling her king and, you know, pulling down her pants and seeing what she was wearing, like that was all brought around to explaining her identity. But the book didn't become entirely about that. And I think that's just so real. And I really liked that.
Yeah, it was going at first. And like, wait, is she going to be trans or is she going to be like, where is this leading? So I remember highlighting a lot of those parts going, what's going on? Right. And when it finally like did that, I think one of the real deals that I'm like, oh, okay. Like it was a pleasant surprise. Not that it would have been wrong if she did turn out to be trans, but it was just an interesting aspect of that I wasn't expecting.
Absolutely. Okay, so obviously you guys gave it a little higher rating than me. So I do have a couple points of things that I think that I would change, but is there anything that comes to mind for you that we haven't already talked about that you think could have improved the book?
I think my only expectation was that I was expecting it to be more horror focused. I do read a lot of horror, so for me, this was a little more on like the tame side. I feel like it's a good like introduction to horror. I feel like it's a good like beginner horror for a lot of people. But I was waiting for more, I think. And I would have liked. I don't know. I hate saying I would have liked twists because I do like the story as it is, but I do wish we had had like a little bit more of mystery about some things, just because I did find it to be a very straightforward story as well. I know you said that earlier, and I do agree. And I do like more of a surprise reveal and stuff like that, I guess. So that I think that would have also helped me a bit.
I think, I don't know, it's not horror how others I think would define it as horror. It's horror for I think an Indigenous person because it's MMIW, because it's like racism and federal jurisdictions and everything. But I get what you mean in terms of like, because when the head was even introduced, I had a hard time taking it seriously, because all I could think was the bouncing heads and Spirited Away. So I'm like, is this like what's going on with this? But when it started getting creepier, like I was starting to imagine it as like one of those illustrations from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark or something. And that's when I was just like, okay, if like more of this is kind of what I was expecting, as opposed to MMIW or kind of the reality of horrors as opposed to like more of the fantastical. So I agree with that. But I kind of wanted more connection with the family. Like we kind of got a little bit from Grace, but it's like it seemed like a bit of a disconnect with Robbie. It felt like a disconnect with her mother. Like I had a hard time connecting with the rest of her family as opposed to like Gran or Grace. So I personally would have liked a bit more of that to get more of that family dynamic as opposed to just expecting, yes, there's a connection there because she's family.
Right. More scares, I think, is the thought. The thing is, like, there's so many different types of horror, and I read a lot of social horror and love a lot of social horror. And, you know, obviously the horrors of reality are just as horrific as anything supernatural. So my take is like wrong, and I recognize that it's wrong, because it could have taken away from the intent of the book, and I respect the intent of the book. And I also think it could get easily gratuitous, which, you know, is a problem. But I think it really lacked like harrowing active scenes. All of the bad things that were happening were off page, which I respect for the story, because I think you could have gotten a lot of critique if he fully put on page horrific things happening to these women. But that's what took away from like that active horror of it, that it felt in that way more like YA. And I could easily recommend this to teens, obviously, because we're following a teenager. Maybe this should have been marketed as YA, or I don't know. I think it was mismarketed. The fact that it's in the Goodreads Horror Awards didn't feel perfectly aligned, but it's also not fully a mystery because I think that things are explained to you pretty early on. So I don't even know. It just feels more like general fiction, which is not a fault of the book, just a fault of the kind of how it was marketed. I think that one of my critiques is that I just couldn't visualize things, and I would have to go back in the book and read if I think it was me or if I think it was actually the explanations. But I found that I was lacking the atmosphere and really being able to understand what everybody looked like or what everybody was wearing or how everybody was presenting themselves, and how it lacked visuals for me, I think. I think that's what I would say. Were you able to predict the reveals? I think, okay, so the main things that I guess we learn is that what like Fox's role is, because Fox is the guy bringing various women into the housekeeping situation. And then they start using that room in the 8th floor. He starts like, renting it out to this man. So did you see Fox's role coming? Did you see the trafficking ring, that being the answer to everything? And then I guess like Grace's return is kind of a reveal as well.
Yeah, I feel like the only thing I didn't see coming was Grace coming home. I feel like that was actually the most surprising part. I feel like Fox was easy to see what his role was. I felt like he, I don't know. I don't know if it's his actions or like just them describing what was going on. I was like, oh, obviously he's, doing this and this is his part in it. So I kind of assumed that. So I feel like the reveals weren't really reveals for me. They were just like, it was just the story unfolding and me following it, but already knowing. And then Grace coming home was the biggest surprise.
Right.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. Like I said, there was like a moment where I was just like, it can't be this straightforward, but it really was. So it was just like, oh, okay, well, I guess that's that then. Yeah, ultimately, Grace coming home was the biggest surprise.
Yeah.
Oh, so true. His name, even in general. I think, yeah, I could feel that there was something bigger happening when it was just Fox at the beginning. I was like, he's probably not like the ringleader. He's probably not the one who is like running this entire thing. There must be something that he is just assisting with, and that turned out to be how it was. I think there were like, I guess, some kind of reveals. Like one of the girls got hit by a car. I didn't necessarily see that coming because how could I have? And then like Fox killed one of the guys in the ring, right? I guess I didn't see that coming either. So it gave duality to his character, I guess. I think that something that I really appreciate about that is the fact that he did the trafficking storyline in a really realistic way, because there's just so much like fear out there, or people who only talk about trafficking in like a stranger kind of way. That's like, don't walk alone to your car late at night. Don't, pick a piece of paper off your windshield because everybody's trying to kidnap people. And that's not the number one way that trafficking actually takes place. It's from people that it's by people that have manipulated you, who have groomed you. It's people who you're in relationships with. So I think that was a really realistic portrayal, that it wasn't just this big bad entity that came out of nowhere. It was somebody that everybody knew.
And overall had positive things to say about.
Right. Okay, my second last question is, will you read from this author again? I wanted to let people know, in case they didn't, that Indian Burial Ground that he published after this is actually following Noemi, who is the character like Lula in the book. She was a teenager, had a daughter, and now she's a teenager. And that book is following her and like the suspicious death of her boyfriend. So I think that's really interesting. And I would read for more, because I imagine maybe we could get like a Miss Shelby book in the future, or we could get like different characters in this universe that he's now created. And that encourages me to continue. But I think I absolutely would regardless, because I had absolutely zero issues with the writing. And that's the number one thing that I struggle with getting into horror or mysteries or anything, really, is like, do I connect with, do I like the writing? Are they a good writer? And I think Nick Medina is a good writer.
Yeah, I agree. I would also, I was going to pick up Indian Burial Ground anyways. So that's really cool to know, because I didn't know what it was about. So yeah, I would definitely pick that up and read it. I also really liked the writing, and I did like the story. And I feel like now that I have more of a idea of what his books are like, and I'd have less expectations on what I think will happen, and now I know how the story might unfold in a sense, I would be more inclined to reach for it. Yeah.
So I had actually was planning on reading that one before this one, and then you announced this for the book club, and I was like, oh, well, I might as well just read that one first. So, yeah, because it's on my 24 of 2024, so I have feel like I have to read it this year. But I would definitely I'm almost more excited to read it now, knowing that, because I wasn't aware that Noemi was the character, and I didn't make that connection. So.
That's interesting. I wonder if there's like a preferred way, like once you finish it, you can let us know if which order you should read it in, because maybe it would be better or worse. And so I wonder if that one kind of spoils anything that occurred in this one. Because it's not like listed on Goodreads or as a sequel or a companion or anything. It's kind of its own thing. My last question is, do you have any recommendations for similar books or movies? I like to end it this way because I just love getting ideas from people. I love when people tell me that like a book that I thought was about one thing actually has something in common with something else that I never would have considered. So do you have anything?
I think the book that stood out the most similar to me was Jackal by Erin E. Adams, which also has to do with racism, also has to do with missing girls. And I felt like there was a lot in common, very different in my opinion, because I do feel like Jackal is more horror in a sense that like there's some, I think it's a little bit, I don't know if I want to say scarier, but I feel like there's a little bit more of those like visuals that maybe people didn't get from this one in that sense. For me, at least.
Bad Cree by Jessica Johns came to mind.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
I mean, it has that same, like, I feel like I actually brought it out, so if you don't know what it looks like, there you go. But my reaction in terms of like the sibling dynamic, I feel like within Bad Cree, I think is fairly similar. I think it was a little stronger in Bad Cree, but it has that same sibling connection or sibling loss within it. I almost think that Bad Cree is a bit more horror in terms of like waking up to find
the birds
or crow head in your hand. So that I think really creeped me out in terms of like, oh my god, if any of my dreams came to life, that would be creepy.
Those are both good ones. I read both of those. I didn't think about Jackal. Jackal's actually a really good one to recommend. And Bad Cree has so many like similar themes. I see a bunch of people mentioning Firekeeper's Daughter. That is like a pretty mystery focused YA. I know a lot of people have been really into it. Monstrilio, And Then She Fell, Island Witch, Bunny. Okay, there's a lot here. Split Tooth is also a really interesting one. Split Tooth by Tanya Tagaq is one of my favorite books. It's very strange. And I also don't know what like genre to put it into. So that's an interesting one. Oh yeah, Never Whistle at Night. Nick Medina has a story in that one, I think.
I think so.
I don't know if I liked it or not, but I gave the anthology overall 4 stars, so I probably did.
I haven't read it yet.
Me neither.
Definitely one of the ones that I'm just like, I need it.
Speaking of YA, though, my main 2 are these. This is Sadie by Courtney Summers and Come Find Me by Megan Miranda, which are both about like teenagers and their connection with their siblings who are missing. And since this book kind of read YA or you're following teenagers, I think that if you loved it, you'll probably like both of these. There's a lot of different themes. Like one is really revenge focused. One has kind of like a romance or like a budding friendship that takes the focus. But I really liked both of these. And then I was thinking The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones, because of all of his books, I think this is one that maybe has like similar topics as far as like even Indigenous identity and struggling with balancing like respecting culture with like finding your own identity and independence. And also it has like more vivid horror scenes. So if you were looking for a little bit more from this and you haven't read any other Indigenous authors, Stephen Graham Jones is my everything. I will secretly announce here that we will be reading a book from him for the book club later in the year. So I'll announce it officially at some point, but you guys can get the early information. So thank you so much for all of the recommendations. I love coming back and looking through everything that popped up. And I think I might make a video around one, like all of the ideas that come in during these live shows at some point. So finally, I'll leave you with this. This is You Know What You Did by KT Nguyen, which is our June book club selection. So there will be a live show sometime, let me see, in early July, I think. I don't know who's going to participate in the live show, but we'll be there and we'll chat about it. And I hope you read it with me. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you to Erin and Melitta for joining. And we'll see you next time. Bye.